Well, hello! Today we have a new quad to build. But before we get into it, a quick reminder to please like or dislike this video if you didn't like it, comment down below, subscribe if you haven't, and don't forget to click on the little bell icon to find out when I'm uploading stuff, because all that stuff really helps me out. But anyway, what have we got? It is the Tyro79. A couple of people in comments asked me if I could get hold of this to see what it was like, and I managed to, thanks to Banggood. Thanks, Banggood. So, a few little, concerns going into it, because here's its big brother, the Tyro99. Now, I was fully behind the idea of getting something and building it from a kit, because it's a great way of learning how things fit together, because when you break it, you instantly know how to fix it, because you know which bit connects to what. So that's a good idea. However, the quality of some of the components in the original kit weren't very good. The camera was a CMOS camera with a 2.8mm lens, made things very narrow and impossible to fly. Didn't like the original props, so I changed those out. I changed the camera out. It then flew and responded a bit better. I was still getting a lot of noise though through the VTX. So, and I've still got to come back to this and tune it, but it's so cold outside at the moment that I'm hiding indoors building things. So the little 79 seems to make some improvements. Still a CMOS camera, but it's got a 2.1mm lens now. The VTX does support smart audio, so that's good. And the rest of the stuff's kind of normal, so F4 flight controller, ESC board supporting D-Shot 600. Let's open up the box and see what we got here. Well, a few key differences already, and you see we've got this one-piece frame instead of having to connect the legs to this little section in the middle, so that might be a little easier to put together. And then we've got bags of stuff. Didn't particularly like the look of those props. The old blunt nose ones are a bit old hat. The stack here comes almost ready configured. Here's a little 1607 2800 kV motors. I have to say I'm not a fan of these motor wires particularly. They're a bit stiff and horrible to move around, but let's see how it goes. There's lots in here to go through, so I think let's go down and do a close-up and we can look at each component, see how it goes together. You'll notice one thing we don't have here is any instructions. The instructions for this are online, and I'll put a link down below so you can take a look at them, see what you think. Okay, so let's take a close look at what's inside now. Okay, we saw this before. This is the actual frame bit itself. Little bit of flex in it, looks pretty strong. That looks like it's about 3mm, I think. I can measure it later. In here we've got the VTX and a connecting cable. So hopefully this will go straight into a socket on the flight controller, so we don't have to think about how to wire up smart audio and things. This is the little weird thing for holding the battery in. Props, as mentioned before, don't look particularly nice, but hopefully should be alright. Here are some little screws. Here are some prop nuts. God, those are so heavy. little quad like this, those weigh an absolute ton. Here is a whole bunch of different size screws. So that is one of the side sections and the bits at the top that go on the quad. These are the aluminium sections that go around those side sections, and this is the bit for, well, in the previous one it was you sort of had the SMA coming out and screwed it in. This time it's going to be for sort of poking the VTX antenna through. There is a battery strap, some bits and pieces, XT30 cable, which is standard, and that's hopefully going to be, well, I'm guessing this is easy plug in to the camera, to the VTX, to the ESC, and it looks like there's one here for S-Bus for hooking up our receiver. Obviously it doesn't come with a receiver. I should have an XM Plus somewhere, so use that. Obviously you want something quite small. Little 3D printed spanners, not a bad idea. There's no gun this time like there was last time. Some cable ties. This is the camera. It looks very much like the sort of Runcam micro sort of size. It says it's got a 2.1mm lens there. Not much going on there, just 5 to 12 volts ground and video, no OSD setup or anything. Here's the stack. So at the bottom here you've got the ESC board with the legs already on. So obviously we're going to have to solder on around here and here. And we also obviously need some power going in, so we need to solder in that XT30 cable here, and we've got this little capacitor to try and stop the noisy electrical stuff getting through into the video. And you see you've got a whole bunch of connectors here, so there's not There's not much soldering to do on that bit, because most of it is like the ESC is going to go to there, and then there's going to be one to the camera, there's going to be one to the VTX, and probably one to the receiver, I would guess. Yeah, that makes it pretty easy really. And then finally in the box you got the 4 motors here. They're kind of coated with black or silver prop nuts to say if they're spinning clockwise or anti-clockwise. I don't know which is which. And we actually already had some prop nuts here, didn't we? So these are obviously spares. It looks like a pretty simple build. There's not much to it, and that's just as well, because I did print off the manual. I wouldn't necessarily recommend anybody print it off because it's pretty basic, but you only really need 1 page of it. It's got a picture of the quad itself, which is not bad as a reference picture, and then it's basically got specs, a huge amount of pages on smart audio, and there's a paragraph here that I challenge anybody to read without going mental, because it literally looks like horrifically translated from Chinese to English in the hope that something happens. More specs, and this thing on page 10, which is the only useful thing in the entire thing, which basically says what screws to use on what when you're actually putting it together. That's more useful. And then you've got a bunch of Betaflight setup, which, you know, okay, fair enough, that's going to be needed to do some bits and pieces. And that is it. Not much in there, is there? So yeah, that in mind, what I'm going to do is I'm obviously going to put the motors on the frame and then get the stack on the frame, solder up the motors. Yeah, and that's almost the entire build work. The rest of it is literally just screwing things together. So last time with the 99, I spent some time sort of filming myself soldering. What I'm going to do here is, rather than try and film myself soldering, which if you saw my review on the TS100, literally just involves seeing the back of my head because I have to lean over and get close, I'm kind of going to come back to here and show you what I've done and show you what I'm going to do. I think that's the best way. So the first task I'm going to say is we'll take the flight controller off of the ESC, so we've got a bit more room. We'll go ahead and tin all these connectors. We'll do the same with these, and then we'll connect them on. I'll probably do that before actually, because I'm guessing, well, I'd hope so anyway, what we've got here is like the perfect amount of space. So it's probably going to come in here and then go around. Yeah, so I might just do this all before I put this on the frame. I think I'm going to solder all these motors in place, and then I'm going to attach those on the frame. So I'll go and do this first, and I'll come on back, and you know, if we hit any problems along the way, then we can discuss. I haven't actually started yet. I was just removing the ESC to go and solder, and I did notice that it's got some little rubberized standoffs here, which is quite nice because it stops some of the vibrations getting through to the gyro, which is quite cool. And I also forgot to mention, of course, although I'll be putting the motors on, I need to put the XT30 on to get power through as well, so I'll do that at the same time. Okay, soldering done. Not particularly clean or tidy. This wire's a bit of a nightmare to work with, but well, they're on, and you see we've got them curled in so it goes around the standoffs, and hopefully will join to the arms, which we'll try next. Okay, all pretty straightforward. The 4 screws to hold in the stack. I've put the flight controller on top, and then there's loads of these screws to put motors in and a few other things. So a little slight confusion. I mean, some things are obvious, like the ESC to the connector on the flight controller. That's fairly obvious. And we can probably make some assumptions like this is going to go in the back there, and that's going to be the S-bus. This VTX one's probably going to go in there. That's not a problem. But we faced a problem because we had 2 cables left. So the one you'd think might fit would plug into this one, and we would sort of assume that's going to be the camera, but that pin space is the wrong size for the camera, and it's the wrong number of holes, so it can't be that one. But if we look at this one, it's got, this is a 3-pin connector going into 4 holes, that way. So is that right? And the pin spacing for this is correct, but it's got one extra. So what, we have to cut the cable? So before I go further, I need to have a look at this board, because the description here does not tell me anything about the pinouts to double check that the wiring's correct. The other thing I want to check, if you look at, it's going to focus, just here, we've got a jumper for ASBUS PPM. Now last time on the Tyro79 we actually had to solder that. So what I'll do before I put the top on is I'll plug a receiver into there just to see if we get an ASBUS signal, or see if we have to do that little jumper again. So we'll do that next and figure out the rest of it. These are things that should have really been in these instructions though. Well, here's something that took a little while longer than we'd imagined, and several iterations of me messing around with this cable trying to go through various things. What I did, I metered down here, imagining, because the camera was power, ground, video, that this would be power, ground, video. And what I found was, so if I held my probe against this pin and this pin, I got nothing. But this pin and this pin gave me a reading. So I kind of thought this was power. For some reason this was skipped and that was ground, so perhaps that was video or that was video. And after messing around, I find out that that can't be the case, because these aren't getting any sort of video signal. So what I eventually discover is, just looking at it, there's something not quite right about that second pin, and there is a dry solder joint there. I've gone ahead and I've taken a little picture with my USB scope, but it doesn't show it very clearly. But another useful way of doing this is if we, so that first one is the 5 volt, and I can use the other 5 volt to check that, and we get a little beat from there. So I'm now holding it against the ground and I've got no continuity there, but if I just slide it down a touch, there is a little bit of exposed circuit board just there, where basically there's not been enough solder flow onto it. So before we can continue, we're going to need to flow some solder over this pin to get a proper connection there, so we can actually go ahead and power that. The rest stuff was fine. The VTX just plugs straight into that. This is sending power. I haven't checked it for ASBUS or PPM yet, because I was like, what's wrong with this one? So let's sort that bit first. Okay, so good and bad news. Good news is that we've got that soldered down properly and now the camera works. Bad news is that in getting in there, which is quite a small space, I managed to touch some solder on these bits. Now I removed that okay, but unfortunately also there was a little component, like one of these little surface mount resistor things, that was there and is no longer there. I mean, it still powers up, the OSD's there, I can spin the motors, but I don't know if it's going to explode now. So yeah, that's a problem. Obviously I wouldn't suggest anybody necessarily go and fix it themselves if they had the issue. Say, hey Banggood, my one's broken. What I can say though is, yes, you need to solder these two jumpers together there to say ASBUS, or of course PPM if you're relying on PPM. As I tested this without, nothing happened, made the bridge and that was fine. I've just attached the VTX, but I realised I forgot to explain about the camera and what I did. There was actually like a 3-prong to a 4-prong, so it was wrong here and it was wrong here. So what I actually did is I cut the connector just with a scalpel there to make it so it would fit. It would have been okay here, we just have to put it over one side, but what I did, using just a scalpel to lift up the little things, I removed the 3 that would plug into this bit, and then I took the other cable that was fairly useless and removed the 4 connector, like this one, and basically put the 3 wires into there. That way there's no possibility of connecting it wrong. Okay, so what I did next is the side bits. So what you do is you have 3 screws that go in and hold the carbon plate onto this aluminium one, and then I can just put the camera loosely in, and see this is all swinging about right now. So while it's doing that, I can screw the bits in the back here and then get it secured from underneath. which I'll do next. And here's the quad pretty much built. You'll notice the screws are loose here, and that's because I'm looking at how it went together because I want to see how much space I had left for the receiver. Right now we've just got this servo lead hanging out, and I'll be taking this XM Plus that I've pulled from something else and putting that in there. I wanted to see how much space I had left with there, so I'm thinking it's probably going to go, if we're going to focus again, probably underneath there and sort of have the antennas coming up there. And now I'm trying to remember if I've already got RSSI on this or not, and the answer is I don't know. We'll find out. So we've gone ahead and we've got the little XM Plus in there just underneath that plate, and we've got the antennas out, and we've used a couple of these cable ties with a bit of heat shrink over the top. The battery strap thing is one of these weird things again. I think this is what they're after. It's kind of a plate there with these pads on to stop it, well, to kind of lift it off the screws, but it just seems a little bit too much to it. There's a lot there, and there's an extra bit of weight. We'll look at it anyway. Anyway, not quite finished because we've got Betaflight set up and stuff yet before we test anything out. Well, I filmed all that on the 28th of January and it's now the 1st of March. So in between that time, what had happened is the flight controller started not getting a picture once again on that connection. So I thought, do I carry on trying to repair it and have it maybe a bit dodgy, or do I do what I would do as a consumer and say, hey, this had a fault and, you know, yeah, I've broken it worse, but can I have a replacement? And yeah, that's no problem, apart from two things. First off, they didn't have any stock, it hadn't been released yet, and secondly, Chinese New Year came along. So it's just taken a while to get, but I have in this bag a replacement flight controller. So I've got the quad in sort of several bits. I'm just gonna rip it apart, put the new one in, and what I found out, because I actually got to the point of doing the Betaflight setup, is that this little XM Plus didn't have the RSSI firmware on it, so I'm gonna reflash that. So I've got that sorted. Okay, so let's go into Betaflight and see what's done, see what we need to do. And what I've done thus far is actually bind the receiver. And if we look at the port section, we seem to have one configured for serial RX, but nothing else. This is actually different to the instructions, which had 3 UART ports, and so that UART 2 should be serial RX. So if I just look at receiver quickly, yeah, I can see by wiggling a stick that that is the right port for that. So presumably this is going to be TBS Smart Audio. I have to check that's the case later. Configuration wise, obviously that was that had S-Bus set because my controller worked. I'm gonna add motor stop there. It's got an AK2K loop. I'll put my craft name in. What else we got? Telemetry, OSD, anti-gravity, dynamic filter. Beeper configuration it's got, but it doesn't actually have a physical beeper, so I'll have to go back in and check to see if the D-Shot beeper is properly enabled. Bit tuning, nothing there, it's all default. I'm just going to up these to 0.8 because that's the norm. Save that. Receiver, as mentioned, I've already bound my control, and the X-Lite I'm using is pretty good. It's sort of staying at the right place. That's just slightly off on the roll there. Put myself a little dead band in, and I've got, as you can see, the RSSI channel on aux 12 there. I had to go back in and add some pins to the receiver just to reflash that, but that seems alright now. Mode, it's got arm and angle set up. I'm going to go back and do that. I am going to go into motors just to see which way they spin, because of course I've soldered these on as is, so I'm going to expect them all to maybe go one way and not necessarily the right way, so we might have to go into BL Heli. OSD, we've got, ooh, that's different. Normally when I see these defaults it's like full of everything. This has got nothing except for the warnings. So I'll go back in and sort the OSD out, add my modes, check my motors and see if I need to go into BL Heli and do anything with it. We have a completed quad. Now, if you're thinking, hey, those props don't look right, these were the originals. Now, I was fully intending to try these out, but what happened is when I was trying to hold this in place to do the nuts up properly, my holder thing slipped and I ended up ripping a side of that prop. These are really hard to get hold of, these tiny little motors, and they're not very tall, so that was my excuse. And I thought it's a little bit unfair to try this with a, you know, a bent and ripped prop. So I put these ones on, which I got from another 3-inch quad. I can't remember what it is, I don't know what the pitch is. It's like that. I mean, I wasn't expecting great things from that because it is 4-bladed and it's got the sort of bull nose. I did want to try it, but they only gave one pair and I knackered one, so I can't. So yeah, I mean, I was probably going to say swap them anyway, but we'll have to try them with that as needs be. The other thing I had a problem with is the this thing that I think goes against here to hold the battery in. It was so thick that I ended up slicing half of it off to cut it down. The batteries I'm going to be trying out, it's this 3S 650 mAh and perhaps this 4S 850, and they are quite chunky in comparison. So this is the Eachine battery strap they give you, and it was not long enough by a long shot. So what I had to do is borrow one off a full speed quad, and to give you the difference between what they supplied and what was needed, if I hold them against the end there, it's not a huge amount more, it's this much. But that much is the difference between going around a battery and just not being able to go at all. So either I completely misinterpreted how this bit works, or they need a longer battery strap. But enough, I've given it a test hover in my room and that worked. All the motors were spinning in the right direction, which is unheard of. If you need to know how to reverse it, look at the last video on the Tyro79 where I look at BL Heli a bit, link up there. Yeah, so let's get this flown and see how it goes now. Well, welcome to a new and different field. It's quite thin and there's an amazing amount of cow poo up the end there. But hey, we can fly here and we finally got the Tyro79. It feels like a long time coming, but let's give it a quick line of sight and then we'll take it out and we'll FPV it. It's a little bit boring in terms of surroundings, but you know, beggars can't be choosers right now. It's on a 3S battery. It's not the lightest thing in the world, but it's a bit windy here today. And you can tell which way the wind's going. That's not bad. Should we give it a quick punch? That is a little bit docile than 3S, I have to say. But we bought some 4S with us as well, so we'll be checking those out. Well, on to flying, but I was first greeted by this screen, where it looked like my rapid fire module was having a real trouble trying to lock onto the signal. So it kind of gets there in the end, and I took off. And, well, it's all in black and white to start with. And then what I got further along is I got the beep to say it's locked in. But then I kept getting the beep, and that indicates that the module had lost sync with the camera and has tried to sync back in again. Basically, I wasn't getting a good sync between the camera and the video receiver in this case. I tested it at home and it looked fine, but yeah, this was dodgy. So after I flew this battery, which was, you know, okay, but not easy to see, I decided to fly the next battery using legacy mode, which would be more compatible. So rather than show you this one which keeps breaking up, let's show you that one. Okay, we're up and at 'em and we're using legacy mode, but you will notice we have still got some tearing on the bottom part of the screen on the OSD layout there, which is weird. I don't quite know why. I think it is down to the rapid fire module. I had a quick test after the event using some other receivers, and I had a quick look at other people's video of them, and I didn't see any other people having problems with this, so I think it's the rapid fire module in this case. I'll do some further investigation, so pretend it's all normal for now, because I don't think it's an actual problem. But anyway, this is me flying on my second 3S battery, and 3S it's okay. It lacks the real punch. You will see my throttle here is reasonably high. We're always sort of, you know, over 50-60% generally speaking, But you know, at the same time, it's okay. You can fly around, you can do some acro stuff. What you generally find is at 100% you don't get that big thrust. It's all a bit damped down. As far as the handling of the quad goes, it's not bad. It's a little bit loose, I would suggest, especially on the yaw. It hasn't got that real snap. It doesn't feel quite as locked in as it could be, and this is down to basically no one's attempted to tune it. Now, normally speaking, of course, in Betaflight you get a pretty good tune out of the default parameters. On this, you need to give it a little bit more and go away and tune it a bit. Now, I wanted to show this picture of looking up in the sun because it does show that the camera is not great at light handling. So when we're going down this way down the field, we're getting a pretty good picture. We can see what's going on. But when we go the other direction, it's not so good. And this is sometimes a problem when you're talking landing. So there we are, look at the sun, and you've got black detail at the bottom. This is, you know, a cheapo camera for you. In terms of the angle, the wide angle, although it doesn't quite seem like a 2.1mm lens to me, as it's supposed to be, you can at least see where you're going. So already it's loads times better than the original camera that was bundled with the Tyro79. But I guess the main thing about this is the 3S is a bit lacking in power. Okay, that was a little bit lacking on these 3S batteries, and the reason I didn't go straight to 4S is because my smallest 4Ss are these 850s, and you can see they're quite a bit bigger than the little 650 3Ss, but that was pretty gutless, if I'm honest, on that particular 3S. So let's try the 4S and see what happens. We'll do another line of sight, and just so I can do a quick blast on the throttle and see what happens. Okay, so this is 4S. Nothing particularly heavy. A bit of little wittering in the sky. Let's do a quick blast and see what happens. I can hear those motors struggling a little bit. I don't know if it's the wind or what. Let's just put air mode on because I didn't have that going. Try that again. And let's blast it. Well, definitely more power. Let's give that another go FPV, shall we? Okay, off we go on 4S now, and it feels a bit more like it's got some guts to it. It's got some more power, it's got some more speed. It's not going too fast. You notice we're already thinking about we need to tilt the camera up a little bit more, which makes me feel that 2.1mm camera lens isn't quite right, because you'd expect to see a lot more if you had like a decent 2.1mm lens. But we've got that punch now, and we've got a bit more speed, and I'm happy with that. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to jump over to the second 4S battery. And the reason I wanted to jump over here is because I thought, oh, I'll try Smart Audio out and try boosting the power of the VTX. You notice I'm still getting some really weird stuff on the OSD. Again, I think it's rapid fire reason. We'll investigate further. But yeah, the reason I wanted to boost the power is to check if there was any extra noise. That said, it's not like I'm needing the extra power. I'm getting absolutely fine signal on 25 milliwatts. But yeah, well, there's a bit of noise there. I'm not sure if it's increased noise from previously. Sometimes when I'm doing this on the edit screen, you can't really tell till you get it on a full screen. It feels like there's a little bit more noise on this 200 milliwatts, but it wasn't exactly noise free before, but just be aware of that. Again, perfectly flyable, not a problem. There's just a bit more there. So in terms of flying again, it's pretty good. Like I said before, it's a little bit loose, so that would be one of the things I'd come back and want to try tuning, just to get it a little bit more snappy, a little bit more locked in. But the actual flying of the quad seems pretty good, and so, again, so much better than the previous Tyro99. as I said, it's not a very exciting field. There's not too much to do with it, rather than just sort of fly around, check out the trees, check out the massive pile of cow poo, and that's about it really. Fly up and down a bit, but you know, you get the basics. I get the feeling this is sort of designed as a sort of, you know, my first quad type thing, where price is more important than performance, and it will at least give you something where you learn how to fly. That is all cow poo. Lovely, eh? I suppose one thing to point out here is that I haven't necessarily got the perfect props for this one, and there may be better ones out there, but at the same time the flight time looked like it was about what I expect. It's not using any more or any less power than I'd expect, and the throttle's about in the position where I would expect it to be based on this sort of quad. So you know, this is not an unreasonable set of props to use, is my feeling there. Anyway, it did okay. It was good for about 3 minutes, although I was having problems bringing it down because this is with the wind I can see where I'm going. Against the wind I can't, so it's easy just to say, okay, let's just get an approximate place where I can't see and ditch it in the ground. Well, what's the conclusion for the little Tyro79? Bit of a mixed bag really, and it's kind of, you sort of want to go, yeah, it's okay. I mean, you can't say it's an outstanding quad, it's amazing, go out and get one now, because clearly it's not. Neither is a pile of junk. It's somewhere in the middle, and it's a bit of a shame because I kind of think there's a few little wasted opportunities here. It is very cheap, and it's certainly built to a price, and I'm kind of behind getting people to build their own stuff, even if it's from a basic kit. So the good point on there is the kit went together very easily. Although these motor wires are awful. If they were like, you know, nicely silicon backed, they would be a lot more easier to work with. But there's a minimal number of solder points to do. That's good. You won't struggle putting this together, even though the build instructions in this is woeful. However, and this is where the instructions really let it down, a beginner approaching this needs to know a little bit more explicitly about where to connect things. So there are no instructions about what cable to connect to where. I mean, fortunately, a lot of these you can work out because there are a certain number of pins in like a port, and it's, you know, so it becomes slightly obvious where you connect the ESC to the board and perhaps the VTX to the board. But if you just had a description in your instructions that labelled out what pins go where and what port is responsible for what. I mean, I'm having to guess what was the camera and what was the VTX and what was the ESC. That would be a lot easier. Obviously, we have two things we have to ignore here. I had the broken FC, which got replaced, and there is a certain amount of boards that will always be dead. In terms of how likely that is, I don't see a great pattern of people saying I got this and it exploded or the board didn't work. I think I was just unlucky. Review thing again. Of course, if you do it when it's dodgy, tell Banggood and say, oi, get me a new one, and they should do that for you. And we also have to ignore that screen tearing thing, which I think is a rapid find, not being able to sync to it. I will do more testing on that one. Again, I checked out a few videos, it didn't seem typical, so I think it's just my combination of this camera and the rapid fire. So, a couple of other things that are unforgivable, especially from a beginner point of view. The camera connector, it didn't have the right pins. It didn't have the right number of pins. Now, I've seen other cameras and they look like they had 4 pins. This one's only got 3. They bundled 2 cables, neither of which fitted. I mean, I don't know what we're supposed to do with that. And of course there was no pin outs on the manuals to say this is how you do it. So that was a bit of a pain. And all they needed to do in terms of these instructions is give something to an English speaking or a native English speaker to say, could you work on our manual? This is what we've written down, because 90% of this I would throw away and rewrite it with a nice little diagram to say plug this into there and label all the pins and tell you things like, hey, whatever you do, you will need to solder across a jumper between S-bus and PPM, for example. If you didn't know that, how are you supposed to know that? And am I supposed to be the manual here because I'm the reviewer? I don't know, maybe that's the way it works. But yeah, if they'd invested a bit more time in getting someone natively English to look at the manual and correct it, it would have been a lot better product, especially for the beginner. Oh yeah, and this battery strap, too small. boo, and this whole thing that needs to be cut down, I'm still not sure if that's the way to connect it because the manual doesn't tell me. In terms of flight though, it did okay. I mean, I did not like the camera. I didn't think it was a wide enough angle for the alleged 2.1mm, and obviously if you poke it into the sun then all the ground turns black, which is not great, but it is very, very cheap, and it flew around okay. It just needed to be sorted out in the tune. But a beginner could build this and could fly it around and could learn to do some stuff on it. It's not too small that it becomes quite fiddly like the micro quad, and it's not too big that the power's going to run away with you, certainly not in this case. Those 850 4S's may be a little bit big, but I didn't feel it was being bogged down too much. It wasn't a super speed demon either, but it was reasonable. So it's kind of like, yeah, it's okay. If this is your sort of thing, if you want to get into it, not spend too much money and enjoy a little bit of a build, even though it's got some quirks you might have to work around, this might be the thing for you, and you can always come back and upgrade some bits later on. Certainly for the price, it's pretty good. But anyway, this came from Banggood, thanks to them, and it is Tyro79, of course. You can find links down below, and all that jazz. I hope this has been helpful. It's been a long video coming, especially for me. I started this months ago. I'll catch you next one. Bye for now.
Well, you've made it to the end of the video, so thanks once again for watching. If you like what you saw, then please consider subscribing, and if you really like what you saw, then be sure to check out the link to my blog for a variety of ways in which you can help support this channel.